In our sermon series, Last Words, as we're looking at the 7 sayings of Jesus on the cross, and today we are looking at one of the most profound ones. It's the phrase and the saying, "It is finished." It is finished is what we're going to look at today as we head into Holy Week. This is a really important week as we reflect and remember and meditate on all the things that Jesus is experiencing and going through this week as we prepare for next Sunday, which is what? Easter, Resurrection Sunday. And so I think there's a lot of great work that can be done in the Spirit this week as we think about these stories, as we think about the happenings this week, as we remember these things are really important every year to just continuously bring back into our hearts and our minds what's happening. And we're going to be doing that again as a Good Friday service as we come together outside of our normal time on Sundays. It's going to be a unique and different service, but I think it's a profound service as we reflect and remember exactly not only what Jesus is doing, but I think also the importance of what these people are experiencing at this time. And I think this is a really unique perspective and an important one as we try to put ourselves into the sandals of these first century people and think about what this must have been like to go through this in real time and in the history of reality. And so that's a perspective I like looking at. We're going to look at that as on Good Friday, and we're going to start that today a little bit is what was the perspective of these people who were experiencing Jesus' crucifixion leading up into the resurrection. And I want to start with a story that, everybody heard the photographer Vivian Maier? Vivian Maier. I had no idea who she was until somebody in the back? That's good. Vivian Maier was one of the most prolific street photographers of the 20th century. She would walk the streets of Chicago early in the 20th century taking pictures of people, which to most people is kind of an eccentric thing to do. Yet she was very introverted. She was very shy. She didn't take money from people for these things. She supported herself as a nanny. And she had an extraordinary eye for photography, full of empathy, humor, and precision. Yet in her time, she never published a single photo. Nobody in her time saw these pictures that were being done. Most were hidden away in storage lockers, undeveloped and seen. And Vivian would actually pass away in 2009 with nobody really noticing or knowing these pictures she was taking. They were forgotten about until a man named John Maloof, who purchased a box containing her negatives at a local auction. As he began scanning these images, he realized he stumbled across something truly remarkable, that these were the works of a master, not an amateur. I have a few of these works that I want to show you, because I think they do capture well not only what it was like to be on the streets of Chicago in the 20th century. So let me show you a couple of these. This is one of my favorites here. Great kind of a shot that shows a lot of kind of what it was like to be on the streets of Chicago in the 20th century. Got another one here for you. I think this is a pretty great picture. And then this is one of my favorite ones, the third one here. I think we should bring this back. What do you guys think? I love it. Real life Chicago in the 20th century. Some of you guys probably dressed like this, didn't you? Probably have them hidden away in your closet somewhere. Well, Maloof tracked down tens of thousands of these photos and these undeveloped film and started sharing them online. And the world started to take notice of Vivian's skill. Critics called her the greatest street photographer of the 20th century. So while Vivian never really got to experience her fame, and maybe that's not something she was even interested in, we'll never know, she had, without really trying it, redefined an entire genre of photography. Her triumph as a photographer came completely unexpected in a completely unexpected way. And I think about this story, and I appreciate this story because it shows that I think unexpected triumphs can be achieved in ways that we don't always understand at the time, or come completely in unexpected ways. Some of the greatest triumphs or greatest victories become in unexpected ways. As Vivian took these photos, neither she nor the subjects realized they would become cherished art for many years, that now people in 2025 would be appreciating these pictures taken nearly 80 years ago. Today is Palm Sunday. It's a day we observe the day of commemorating the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem as the coming king. Yet as we look at the perspective of those who were living this, no one in the crowd could imagine that in less than a week's time, the celebrated king would not be coronated onto a worldly throne, but instead would be dead on a Roman cross. That many years later, people would not be remembering this event as Jesus' greatest triumph. It would actually be the death of Jesus as his greatest triumph. For the gospel writers, it wasn't the entry they call a triumph or a victory. It was at the cross, which for the people living these events must have been completely unexpected, or coming from a completely different place than they would have imagined God's triumph. So let's read the story of the Palm Sunday story. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 21, 1 through 9 as we begin this discussion and this study. So you can follow along with me in your bulletins. It says, as they approached Jerusalem and they came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. And tie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away. This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. Say to daughter Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey. The disciples went and did this as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them as Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven. Hosanna meaning save or praise in the time of Jesus. And you can see here that there's assumed expectations of Jesus within this story. And this is where I want to start. The assumed expectations that we have of Jesus in these moments. If you put yourself into the historical reality of these people, it was 1,000 years since King David really brought in the golden age of Israel, David and Solomon together. This was really the way of Israel looking at this was our finest hour. The best time to be an Israelite was during that time. So 1,000 years from then. It's been roughly 400 years that they've been captive by foreign powers, whether it be the Persians, the Greeks, and now the Romans. So most of them have no idea, at any recent memory of what it was like to live in a time though they weren't captive to a foreign power. I think the people of Israel really groaned and yearned for a return to a time back to that golden age of Israel, the times of David, the times of Solomon. You could imagine there was a sense of like freedom and respect and validation of those times that they wanted and needed and felt like they needed. They want to be vindicated. The branches there, as we know, are the palm branches. You guys probably who grew up in the church remember coming in with palm branches as kids and walking around the churches. I don't see that too often anymore, but that used to be a thing that we did all the time. And the palm branches during this time was a sign of kind of a victorious, conquering general. And so if you look at the history of Israel, there was these people called the Maccabees. There was a Maccabean revolt that's done before the New Testament when they repelled these Greek overlords out of Jerusalem who wanted to put a Greek, a kind of an image of the Greek king into the temple. They repelled them out, and in the victory celebration, they would wave these palm branches. And so these palm branches being waved or laid before Jesus as he went into this entry was kind of this recognition that we're going to have this same rebellious, victorious king or general who's entering in. And Jesus at the height of his power at this point and in his fame. And so people are like, this is it. This is what we're expecting, is that this Jesus who does the miracles and the healings and this profound teacher who's going to enter into the city. He's going to say a few really important things. He's going to maybe perform a few miracles, and we're going to coronate him as our king, and he's going to push out those Herod kings, and we're going to have finally freedom from Roman occupation, is the expectation that they see Jesus fulfilling here. For the people greeting Jesus, this was the anticipated expectation that they had. That here is the person who's going to free us from Roman occupation and make Israel what it was like in the days of David. A son of David again entering Jerusalem as the conquering hero. And their minds filled with dreams of revolution. You can imagine them saying to one another, we will finally be free from the shackles of Roman occupation. Isn't this exciting? You can imagine them saying, finally, we'll have a restored and powerful Israel again, like the days of David. As they rightfully praised Hosanna, Hosanna, praise to Jesus, the Son of David, none of them truly anticipated or expected how the week was going to play out. In fact, I would imagine that many in the crowd who were yelling Hosanna will just in a few days be yelling, crucify him. The anticipated expectations had set them up for completely missing what Jesus was going to be doing throughout this week. It made me wonder how often we celebrate Jesus, but we have our own assumed expectations of him. And I want to start here as we discuss and go into Holy Week. Is what are your expectations, assumed expectations of Jesus that might be different than what he's actually doing? That he might be doing something completely unexpected in your life. What happens to our faith when we assume expectations of Jesus and then those things seemingly fall unfulfilled? This is usually where I see people shaky most in their faith, is when they have this assumed expectation. Jesus, I need you to do this. I want you to do this. And he says, I'm going to do something completely unexpectedly. And it kind of rocks our boat, just like it did these first generations. I think leading into the week of Easter, as we start our reflections around how we celebrate Jesus, I need us to kind of bring these things to the table a little bit. Let's put these things on the table around what our assumed expectations of Jesus are in our lives. And again, let's be open to the idea that maybe what he's going to be doing is the unexpected. Maybe what he's going to be doing is bringing victory in places you would have never even imagined you needed victory in, just like he did here, and just like the story with Vivian Meyer, is that maybe our greatest victories will come in the most unexpected places. I compiled a list of what I would think, there's probably many of these assumed expectations, but I put a list of 3 that I thought were probably the most common that I see. People's most common assumed expectations of Jesus. And you can kind of just think about these. Maybe they pertain to you, maybe they don't. But these are the ones that I think I've seen the most in my 10 to 12 years of being a pastor. The first one is, if I believe in Jesus, all my problems will go away. Now, I don't know if you say this out loud, but we definitely kind of think this way, right? You know, I talk to a lot of new believers who come to Jesus and they go, yeah, I've come to Jesus, I come to church, I kind of do all the things, so all my problems should not be as big, right? You know, we can easily approach Jesus as this quick fix to solve a particular problem. This is just like the people who are praising God, Hosanna, like, yes, here's our quick fix. Here's our quick fix. He's going to get all the leadership change out. We're going to have this new King David, and everything will be golden like it used to be. Yet, when we're caught off guard, we realize what Jesus is doing is he's not looking for the quick fix, or maybe he's not looking at the particular problem that you imagine him fixing in your life, but he starts rooting out the source of our problems. Maybe he goes even deeper than we even are comfortable with. This is where I find most people struggle with Jesus as Lord, is we like him as Lord in little particular areas of our life, but when he starts touching the idols and the things that we aren't ready to let go of, we're like, hey, buddy, I didn't bring you into my life so you could shake my world. I needed you just to fix a few things for me. He starts removing idols. He starts removing insecurities. He starts making you look at things like hard truths you have to confront in your life. He forces us to deny things like ourselves to be better conformed into his image, and we don't always find comfort in that, do we? Realizing that we are looking and following a Jesus that forces us to be honest about the things that we've gone through, the things we're doing, and having to find ways out of that. The triumph of Jesus doesn't mean an easy life, but the triumph of Jesus can turn our lives upside down in order to get us right side up. That he will turn your life upside down in order to get your life right side up. This can cause more problems right away than you might imagine. But what you see is there's an unexpected freedom there. There's unexpected victories of things that were completely out of your peripherals that you finally found peace from. And in fact, a lot of those things that you were like, I need help here, stemmed from other issues that you didn't even understand were there. So we can't come to him with this expectation of, here, I'm going to give you some access to little bits of my life, God, and I'm going to ask you to do some quick fixes here and there, and he just completely implodes your life. Because that's what he does. But there's always goodness as you walk through it. The second expectation I often see is this one: following Jesus will make me rich, successful, or prosperous. Even if you intellectually reject this, I still see people fall into this when we look at other people's version of Christianity or even other religions. Like, man, those people have the special sauce. I call this like the special sauce expectation. Like, oh, I'm looking at another person's life and I'm comparing myself to theirs, and I'm like, if I could just do everything they're doing, then I'll get everything they have. This was a big cultural thing, I think, where I grew up in Utah, where there was kind of this superficiality. There was this sense of kind of perfection, kind of the spirit of perfection kind of across the air there. And everyone was trying to figure out what other people had by conforming their lives to what other people were doing in order to get the results of these other people. Most of it was surrounded around things like, how do I find success, rich, or prosperity? So often we compare our lives attempting to obtain the type of life that others have. We'll find those friends, we'll build relationships around those people, we'll even join different churches in order to try to grab hold of what those other people might be experiencing, based on mostly exterior qualities. And I'm going to say this: Jesus may not give you a life of prosperity and plentifulness. He may not, and he might. But instead, what I have found Jesus do is completely unexpected. Instead, he gives you the gift of contentment in lack. What he does is unexpected. He gives us generosity in scarcity. He gives us joy amidst hardship. I don't think a lot of people enter into a relationship with Jesus necessarily with that in their mind. They're kind of going, okay, what are you going to give me? What do you got for me, God? Oh, great, Jesus, this is the way. I'm going to follow him. And then you realize there's so much unexpected victory that's happening because you find contentment, generosity, and joy in places that should never exist there. Expectation number 3 that I often find is this: if Jesus is working, I'll always see change right away. Boy, if Jesus is working, I'm just going to see the change just like that. Some of us will experience rapid spiritual growth. Some of us will. Some of us will come to the table of Jesus and be like, wow, I'm like changing quickly, and it's amazing, and it's a great experience. I think when I came out of my prodigal days into what I would call my sponge phase, where I was just absorbing all of these things about God. And I remember I sat down at the table, this was before I had kids, and I read the entire Bible in 30 days. And I don't think I could ever do that if I wanted to right now. It was just the sponge phase. I remember I spent hours there. Poor Amy, she was kind of Bible widowed there for a month. But everyone comes to a time when you're going to eventually feel like you're stagnant. Everybody. No matter who you are, you eventually come to a time where you're kind of like, boy, the exciting honeymoon phase of following Jesus, the quick fix, the rapid spiritual growth you may experience, it starts to slow down, and you find it kind of like, what's the stagnancy that I feel? As counter as it may feel, this is often where you actually are going to find the most growth, unexpectedly. I don't think many people understand that in those stagnant states is where you're like, well, you're kind of hungry for this quick spiritual growth, can actually be a place where you're going to find your greatest victories. You know, where Jesus kind of models this as he goes into the wilderness to be tested. This is how I think about those seasons of stagnancy where you're just like, boy, where are you? I have a hard time finding motivation to go pray to you. I'm having a really hard time finding motivation to even read my Bible. I'm feeling stagnant. It's kind of like you're going out into the wilderness. But this is where God really likes to test the faith of his followers. Because it's hard to choose him when you're stagnant, isn't it? That's like the number one thing that makes it difficult is you're like, I'd much rather binge watch season 3 than really get involved with my prayer life. Here's where people can often panic. They become discouraged. Probably the number one thing I see is we blame others for feeling this way. We blame pastors. We blame churches. Well, I'm not in the right place. I need to just change it up. Maybe it's something different that's happening there. If this is you, remember, you're a seed planted and cultivated, not a fireworks show. Okay, remember, you're a seed planted, cultivated, that must be cared for and raised and treated and well tended. But often in our spiritual life, we're looking for that change right away. We're like, I need to be a fireworks show that's just bam, 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 bam. The best spiritual walks with Jesus unfold slowly. The ones that really stick, the seeds that are really planted firm, are those that unfold slowly. Found in time when you continuously choose to embrace the things that will form you into Jesus, even when it's difficult to choose those things. Denying those things that will deform you rather than in really choosing a life, those things that form you. No pastor, church, mentor is responsible for this. No one can abide in Jesus for you. You have to abide in Jesus yourself. I wish I could proxy abide for you, but I can't. I just kind of point the way. Say, here's the direction. Let's all go together, right? So those are the three kind of main expectations that I often see us as we approach Jesus. As this first century group was approaching Jesus with their own expectations, I think we often do that ourselves. That as we think about the celebration of his arrival as a coming king, as a son of David, rightfully so, we need to also be aware that are we approaching the table with our own expectations, leaving us with tragic consequences of our own faith over time, where it kind of sets us up as that first crowd, that first audience, where we're looking at Jesus like, yes, I'm going to get all these things, but a week later we're all yelling, crucify him, because he didn't match up to our expectations. Rather, let's measure our expectations through the completed work of the cross, the resurrection of Jesus, these unexpected things that happened that shocked the very world and still does today. And what can these things teach us about what God is really bringing victory over? That Jesus' triumph wasn't through worldly power. It wasn't through our own assumptions, but through the power of self-sacrifice. So let's look at it is finished. John 19, 28 through 30. We talked a little about this a couple weeks ago, or was it a couple weeks or last week? I can't even remember. I am thirsty. John 19, 28 through 30 says this. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I am thirsty. A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he received the drink, Jesus said, it is finished. With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. It is finished. The finished work of Jesus came in a very unexpected way, but became the greatest triumph that the New Testament writers give us. The phrase, it is finished, is the Greek word what? Do you guys remember? Anybody know it? Tetelestai. Tetelestai. It's one of my favorite words. Tetelestai. It means it is completed, it is finished, it is accomplished. Tetelestai. Scholars call this word a condensed symbol. A condensed symbol, like an icon on a computer screen. When you click on it, it brings a wide range of images and programs. This is very similar to the word tetelestai. And it's a very classic God to use a single word to describe many different things. All of them being seen and fulfilled in Jesus. So we're going to look at some of these images that are being fulfilled in the word tetelestai. And first off, let's look at how what the range of meaning is in the first century. The first one is that of servant. If you were a servant, if you were given a particular task by your master and you went and accomplished it, you return to your master and you'd say, tetelestai. It is accomplished. It is finished. It is the verbiage of a servant talking to his master. If you were a priest and you're examining the livestock to be sacrificed, looking for the flaws and blemishes and found none, this is an approval sacrifice, you would move it forward with the pronouncement that this lamb or this whatever it is tetelestai. It's tetelestai. If you're an artist, you're a creator of wonder and art, once the project was completed, an artist would step back and there'd be kind of this moment where they'd, tetelestai. The art is completed. If you were a merchant, If you had a buyer who maybe owed you money and they had a debt to you, and when they paid it full, you would offer them a certificate that stamped on it would say, "Tetelestai, it is completed. The debt has been paid in full." And if you were a prisoner, a certificate of wrongdoings would be hung over your cell. And when your penalty was served, they'd stamp on it, "Tetelestai," marking your completion of the sentence. The finished work of Jesus, I think, encompasses all of these pictures of what it means for him to complete. Only God could orchestrate a completion so perfectly that it fulfills all the pictures of a single word. That Jesus is the servant who completed the task given to him by his Father. He became the sin for us so that the power of sin and death would be defeated. He is the priest and the sacrifice. He's both in this picture. He is the priest who mediates on our behalf. He is the spotless lamb that delivers his people from the captivity of sin and death and for the forgiveness of sin. He is the artist who has been working since the beginning of the Bible, the story of the Bible, forming a work of art that has led to this in the climax of the story. That at the cross and resurrection, God can see his artistry of his completed salvation of humanity. This is what I love about studying the Bible, is finding that common thread from the beginning to end and how Jesus is the fulfillment of that completed artistry of work. He is the merchant. He pays our debt, so we are no longer under the obligation to suffer the justice of God for our own sins, because he provided the payment for himself, for us by himself. He is the prisoner. He served our wrongdoing, offering us forgiveness in its stead, so that again we are free and liberated from the power of sin and death. All of these pictures are captured in that one word, tetelestai. It is finished, it is completed, it is accomplished. In the most unexpected of ways. No one expected Jesus, his coronation as king, his throne as king, to be a Roman cross. But this is, as the gospel writers were thinking about years later, this is the moment of his greatest triumph. At least beginning the moment of his greatest triumph. He knew we didn't need another earthly ruler to lead them out of some Roman oppression. How many of you guys know there's always going to be another oppressor? I mean, history teaches us that. You liberate from one, you're going to get another one. Jesus knew we needed something greater than that. We need something far more victorious than that. That we needed a different kind of king, a different kind of triumph, one that completed the battle, bringing freedom, holiness, forgiveness, and victory to all who follow this king. And at the time, it was completed with unexpected thought, with great mourning and fear. I think in that moment, especially if you think about what happens on Friday, as they looked back, just like the story of Vivian Meyer, as they looked back in time, in the hindsight of what's happening, they're looking back and going, wow, what a victory. What a completion. What an accomplishment. What a triumph over sin and death. Something that nobody was thinking about in those moments leading up to his death. This leads to the triumph of the cross. Paul writes this to the Colossians. In Colossians 2:13 through 15, he says, "When you were dead in your sins and in the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made you alive with Christ. He forgave us all our sins, having canceled the charge of our legal indebtedness, which stood against us and condemned us. He has taken it away, nailing it to the cross. And having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross." And that word triumph is a really important word to a Roman, like Paul, who's reflecting on this. A Roman triumph was a Roman victory parade that was reserved only for the greatest generals, only for the greatest military leaders of his day. He's using this kind of paradox, the same what we're seeing with Palm Sunday, to show that even in Jesus' greatest weakness, that we thought was maybe the worst day of his life, we're actually seeing his victory parade being pronounced, his greatest triumph. As a conquering general would disarm his opponents, he would then parade them as public spectacles through the victory. And this is exactly what he's doing. With all the hatred, all the scorn, all the rejection, all those things that put him there, he's embarrassing them by making them a public spectacle in his triumph. And this is how Paul is reflecting on this and thinking about this. This is exactly the paradox of the cross of Jesus. A device that was expected to embarrass and dishonor Jesus became the place of his greatest victory and triumph. This is why, as followers of Jesus, we can look at the cross not as a defeat or something to be ashamed about, but as a symbol of God's coronation of Jesus as our King. This is why we carry them around our necks. My mom got me this when I was 18 years old. Never taken it off. It's the symbol of God's triumph over sin and death that marks the cross. It is where he accomplished his faithful and loving work for all of us. Yet if we put ourselves in the position of those people who witnessed all of this is where we're going to start leading into Good Friday. It wouldn't feel like a triumph, yet would it? No one is there as an eyewitness, like the people we read about, all the Marys and John a few weeks ago. No one's looking at it and going, what a victory in that moment. If anybody, it's the Romans who were going, we got him. It's the principalities, the spiritual forces out there, as Paul will reflect in Ephesians. It's like, we did it. We ended him. The threat has been eliminated. The triumph will come with thinking later. For those people who are witnessing this as the worst day of their lives, many would scatter and run, afraid of the uncertainty that would happen. Imagine this. You go all in on Jesus for 3 years. You're following him. You give everything over to him. He says a lot of weird things like, I'm going to die and come back, and I'm going to raise this temple and bring it back in 3 days. And you're like, okay, Jesus, whatever that means, bye. And then he just dies completely unexpectedly. And your whole life was planned out. Like, we're going to follow this king. We're going to be his right-hand man in this new kingdom, and we're going to be great and powerful people, and we're going to... Wait, he died. That wasn't supposed to happen. That wasn't supposed to be how it went. And so they scatter and run. Very few stay around to be there for him. And maybe you find yourself in a similar place. Maybe you find yourself in a similar place. You're going through uncertainty about faith, life, or circumstances. You're looking at the triumph of the cross like, yes, but you're still going, but there is a whole lot of uncertainty in my faith, life, or circumstances that I'm really struggling with right now. This is the time, this is the week where we start bringing that onto the table and letting it come to the surface in our lives and going, help me in this uncertainty. I can't see how you're going to bring this to life. I really need your help. Perhaps you feel confused or discouraged about why God didn't intervene like you expected him to. We have these kind of expectations like, all right, like you're going to intervene on my behalf, like I expect you to, and then it's silent. And those are some of the hardest times as you kind of go through these things and you realize there's silence there. If that's you, hold tight to where Jesus is, that there is going to be something unexpected. In fact, I'm going to ask you to expect the unexpected. Even if it walks you through mourning or grief or insecurity or whatever it is, know that these things are not something that are going to isolate you from Jesus, but are actually going to be unexpected ways that he's going to bring victory into your life. You guys know this. You guys know my story. That it was in my deepest and most difficult heartbreak that I experienced God's power the most. That's why we shouldn't be afraid of grief or mourn or whatever it is. Those things can a lot of times want to push us away from God. But when we bring him into it, oh, what a beautiful place it is. We lost Thora this week, our little 4-year-old that we've been praying for. But Jesus gained her. And I've been wrestling with that myself. On Friday, she passed, and I just was like, oh, this was not the expectation, God. This was not the expectation I had. And I've never prayed for someone as much as I prayed for her. And so you're sitting there in this hard place of going, how do I wrestle with this, God? But again, I found myself on Friday, my Sabbath day, sitting in my laundry room on the floor, just going, I'm here again, Lord. Meet me in it. Meet me here. Meet her family there. Meet her parents and her grandparents there. Meet and expect God in the most unexpected places. That while death is dark, sorrowful, and scary, without death, there will be no resurrection. And as we go into Easter, I want us to be thinking about that. As we go into Good Friday, be thinking about that even without death, there would be no resurrection.